This weekend is the Super Bowl, and while a lot of us will be interested in the game, there's a significant fraction of people who are far more focused on our topic for today, the halftime entertainment, provided by Kendrick Lamar and the Kendrick Lamar Drake rap beef. It's time for us to talk about that, and in order to have that conversation, I suggest we actually use AI tools. Welcome to Tales from the Jar Side. This is the Wikipedia page for this year's Super Bowl halftime show. It will feature American rapper Kendrick Lamar as the headline performer. Now, if I go to an AI tool and I ask about the rap beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, I'm going to run into a problem pretty quickly because, of course, the training date of the AI tool is going to precede all the interesting events that happened pretty much last year. Now, I'm going to look at this stuff from a Java point of view. I'm a Java developer, and while I can do Python and other languages, I'm going to focus on the framework called LangChain4j. It's a very useful framework for me. It allows me easily to incorporate outside information into our existing system, what they call RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. Plus, it makes it easy for me to use multiple AI tools at once. I have a whole series of videos on that, and I'd like to demonstrate now how I can use that to tell me more about that beef and about the consequences that may occur this year. So I have a class here called FeudTest. I have some annotations on it. This is going to be a JUnit test, and the test is focused on 4 different AI tools: GPT-4o from OpenAI, Claude from Anthropic, Gemini from Google. I'm going to use the new 2.0 version there, and Mistral as well. So let's use all 4 and see what we get out of that. The problem that's going to arise is that the training data cutoff for the information about the beef is prior to last year. It's like October of 2023 or something like that, and that's going to be a significant problem. So I do have access here, or I'm linking to a Wikipedia article that is dedicated to talking about that feud. Here, in fact, is that article inside of Wikipedia, and this article just keeps growing and growing. That too is going to be a bit of a challenge because, after all, we have a limit into how much data we can supply inside of a request. And the size of this article, I'm afraid, is going to very rapidly exceed that. It doesn't look like that much text. You see, I'm just scrolling down, and it's not that bad. But this is filled with HTML tags and a lot of Wikipedia's own tags. And then when you get to references, this thing goes on and on and on until we get to reference number, I believe it's 197 at the very bottom here. 198 now. Now, if I go back to the Java code, I want to highlight the following 4 things. These are the ways I can load those 4 models into my class. So this is using OpenAI. So this will in fact use GPT-4o. This is for Anthropic, where I'll be using Claude 3.5 Sonnet. This is Google's Gemini models, and I'll use the latest Gemini 2.0 Flash. And finally, this is for Mistral. And you can see one of the nice features of LangChain4j is they've kind of smoothed out all the variations and made it very easy to load all of them however you want. Okay, here are the questions that I'm going to run through the models programmatically, and then we're going to have to talk about the situation. So the first question is, tell me about the beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Give me the information there. The second question is the key one here. It's going to tell about our date and time information. How did it escalate in 2024? Who won? Of course, I expect some very wishy-washy answers on that, but we'll see what we get. Why was the song Not Like Us so controversial? And then, of course, the key question that everybody's debating: what are the chances that Kendrick will perform Not Like Us during the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show? So I want to run through all those questions on all of those models and see where we get. Now in LangChain for J, they have you build an interface which the framework will then implement on your behalf. So I could either provide a simple little prompt to get an answer out, or when I need to supply extra data, which is what we're going to do shortly, I'm going to say, let's answer with data. I'll put in the prompt and the extra information. And overall, I'm saying, given that information, answer the prompt, and we'll go from there. Now, first of all, before I supply any information, let me show the disaster that could possibly happen. From our point of view, it's not actually a disaster. This test is called Feud without any extra info, and you can see that I'm using the AI services class in LangChain for J to implement that interface using GPT-4o, adding in some memory so that it'll remember the questions and responses for all those individual prompts. And then for each one, I'm going to ask it to answer and print out the result. And let me run that now, and we'll see what we get. Okay, let's take a look at the results. First question of tell me about the beef between them, and it starts talking about how they had a series of competitive exchanges and subtle diss tracks, as they say, over the years, and they have a couple of illustrations of those. I'll just skip by that. And then we get to the interesting part. How did it escalate in 2024? And the answer is, I'm sorry, but I can't provide real-time or future updates, including specific events from 2024, as my training only includes information up to, and there it is, October of 2023. So when I ask who won, it's not really going to be sure. And if I skip down to why was Not Like Us so controversial, it's going to be, looks like there might be some confusion, as there is no well-known track titled Not Like Us by either Drake or Kendrick Lamar up to that date, etc. So, of course, it doesn't know anything about the Super Bowl either. And that leaves us with a problem. Now, the way we're going to solve this problem is a couple of options. One is that in LangChain for J, they have what they call document loaders. I can retrieve information from files on my disk or PDF files I happen to supply, or any of a number of types. One type in particular is called a URL document loader. So what I can do is I can give LangChain for J the link to that web page. I could say, okay, go to that Wikipedia article on the Feud and parse it using a text document parser, and then take the text off of that document and stuff it right into the query. Put it right into the prompt and answer the questions again. Now, I have a little Boolean here to say, wait a minute, is the size okay on this? Because now we're going to encounter a problem. Each of these models has a limit on what they call the context window. How big a prompt can I stuff in there? For OpenAI's ChatGPT-4o, if you look at the documentation, you find out that limit is 128K, 128,000 tokens. And roughly 1,000 tokens is about 750 words in English. So if I start right off here, I have a little private method further down that does an estimate of the number of tokens based on an OpenAI tokenizer and says, okay, is it too big? Or any of these questions too big? Then I'll say the document's too large, otherwise I will run it. And this is where we're going to wind up coming up to a halt right away. So let me run this right now. And you could see that I immediately got, yeah, the size of the document in terms of raw tokens is about 173,577, and that's too large to fit into the context window. This whole process goes by the name of prompt stuffing. You're actually putting all the documents right into the context window, and we find out here, yeah, that's not going to work. Sorry about that. So I will skip that one, and I will go down to the next one where I'll say, all right, if OpenAI can't handle it, what about Claude? Now, Claude from Anthropic actually has a context window that's 200K. And unfortunately, I'm going to demonstrate this, even though our estimate there of 173K tokens does fit into the context window, Claude's going to say, yeah, no, apparently they have a different tokenizer. It's going to just be outside that 200K limit. So let me demonstrate that right now. Same basic test, just switching to Claude this time. And you see what we get are the printouts of all those prompts. Remember, I got 5 different questions, so I got the prompts 5 times, and they're all about the same. I mean, my questions aren't all that big, but they all throw an exception saying an Anthropic HTTP exception, invalid request error, message prompt is too long, 200,000, 225 tokens, which is just too big for the 200K maximum. And in fact, I get that over and over again, going, yeah, sorry, we're not going to be able to handle that. And I'm like, oh, great. Now what? One more step I can take before I have to get clever is to use Google's Gemini. One of the features of Google's Gemini is they have a much, much larger context window than any of the other AI tools. In fact, the size of the context window for Google's Gemini Flash is, and wait, I got to do my Dr. Evil impression, 1 million tokens. I'm sorry. That's terrible. But anyway, the idea is we have a whole million tokens, and a lot of stuff fits into 1 million tokens. So this one says, sure, let's go grab that again, and we'll check one more time. But when I use Gemini here, this is going to fit without a problem, and then I can go through and ask all my questions. So let's see how that works. Okay, let's take a look at the results this time. Again, roughly the same size in tokens, even though Gemini has its own tokenizer, and I didn't actually use that one to get the estimate, but they're roughly the same. And again, I'm supplying the Wikipedia article as the context information. Tell me about the beef, and then they have, it's a complex and evolving conflict between 2 of the biggest names in hip-hop, and then they go on and go through various features, but now we start to get information from 2024. In March 22nd of 2024, Lamar dismissed the idea of a big 3, and on and on. And then personal attacks in May, and aftermath and all of that. So how did it escalate in 2024? Well, a series of diss tracks like that, and push-ups and tailor-made freestyle. Who won? Now, of course, the who won is completely subjective. So it says it's heavily debated, but many publications and fans declared Kendrick won. And of course, most people I know would agree that Kendrick won. I will say definitively that I am not in any way remotely qualified to have an opinion. So I'm just going to show this to you, but let's move on. My son thinks, though, that Lamar won easily, and I'm going to go with that, because why not? I said, why was Not Like Us so controversial? Well, there were serious allegations and explicit language and imagery and cover art and community impact. It was a big deal. So the big question, what are the chances Kendrick will perform Not Like Us during the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show? And now the AI tool is going to back off a little bit. It's difficult to give an exact probability. Yeah, I'll bet. But here's an analysis of the factors that would influence the likelihood of Kendrick Lamar performing Not Like Us at the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show. Factors increasing the likelihood is that, hey, it was a big hit and made a big impact. And sure, it's part of his whole brand now, you know. Performance style, obviously, Kendrick is really good at being a hater, and he's not going to object at all to people seeing that on the biggest stage he may ever have. And factors decreasing the likelihood is the NFL's probably not going to be real happy about this. Now, people have been waiting all week to see if the NFL would step in and go, yeah, please don't do that. But all evidence from the NFL is they're just going to let him do whatever he wants to do. So we'll see. But it does try to project a family-friendly image at the Super Bowl, and they may want to do some censorship, and who knows, maybe there's a public backlash. It is a big audience to cross over there. So the chances of that are relatively low. I don't think I agree with that. But again, my opinion is formed just from talking to people. It's not because I know anything or know anybody. Okay, so we see that Gemini's got a context window big enough to actually do this, but we can be a little bit more clever about it. For example, rather than take the entire Wikipedia article, HTML tags, citations at all, you can use a library to extract just the text out of it. The library that most people in Java use is called Jsoup. And Jsoup is a way to access HTML pages and get the text out of it. This is to get a document out of it and then extract just the normalized combined text of this element and all of its children. So they give little samples here, and I can assure you this is going to be way, way smaller than the other ones. I mean, it's going to be so much smaller that that should fit into all of these context windows. So I'll go ahead and check the size again, but this time I could go back to GPT-4o. Let's give it a shot and see where we wind up. Here we go. Let me tell you what happened, and then I'm going to take another step as well. First of all, you see that now the size of the document is only about 22K, only about 22,000 tokens. That's not bad at all. And when I asked the first question, it gave me the background and origins and initial disses and Cold War phase, and then the escalation. So it knows the information's in there. And finally, what happened is, rate limit exceeded. Apparently, when I asked these questions, I've been doing too many experiments recently, and I can no longer ask 4 questions or 5 questions in a row like that. They're rate limiting me for a little while. Well, one of the nice things of using LangChain for J is I'll switch models. What do I care? So I'm going to change from GPT-4o to Mistral. Why not? Mistral is the company in France. Both the product and the company are called that. I'm using their latest large model as the model I'm going to be working with. Everything else code-wise here is the same. Let me run this one. One thing I should tell you, by the way, if you look at the documentation for Mistral, their context window is an odd number. It's 131K. Rather than 128. Okay, I don't know why. I got a slightly odd result here that I got to point out to you. First of all, the initial question, sure, it took that information and it gave me the background and the initial disses, and there's sneak disses section. Okay. Between 2015 and 2022, there were subtle diss tracks and interviews. Here's the escalation up to 2024. Including Not Like Us and legal actions. The legal action apparently from Drake settled a couple of weeks ago, or I think he dropped the lawsuit. I think he gave up on that. So there's discussion and analysis and verdict that by early 2024, many music outlets and social media users conceded that Kendrick Lamar had the upper hand in the feud, though some noted that his victory felt hollow due to the severe nature of the accusations. Right. And there's a lot of information here, relevant songs and so on. And then when I asked about the escalation part, which now I don't really need that information, it's in there, I got this unusual error. I don't think I've gotten that before, saying, hey, you did a system annotation after the assistant annotation, and that should be a completely separate question, but maybe it is with the memory throwing it off. I'm not sure why that happened. But then when it went back to who won, it was like, sure, I'll answer that question. So, okay, determining who won is subjective. It depends on various factors, and media and critics believe that Kendrick won, and some commentators noted that it felt hollow, and social media users went with Lamar, and so on. And then finally, when I get to the question at the bottom, let me skip the why was Not Like Us controversial. It's the same basic idea. Let me get to the question about the chances of playing in the Super Bowl halftime show. And the comment says, there's several factors, including the NFL's approval, the artistic direction of the show, and public sentiment. So they list factors in favor, like popularity and artistic statement and fan expectations. And against is, of course, the controversial nature of the lyrics. The NFL and sponsors may not like this, and legal and ethical considerations. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a big issue here. Not these days. And the prediction here was, given the controversial nature of Not Like Us and the NFL's preference for family-friendly content, the chances of Kendrick Lamar performing this song during the halftime show are relatively low. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, okay, let's see. And a more likely scenario is he might perform a medley of his hits, possibly including a brief reference or snippet of Not Like Us. Now, that actually makes a lot of sense, and that's the first time I've seen that suggestion from any of the AI tools. So, as it says, this approach would allow him to nod to the song's impact while keeping the performance suitable for a wider audience. They buy music too, right? The old Charles Barkley reframed line. So we'll see. That's an interesting thought there. Okay, so this was all prompt stuffing and just figuring out a way to get the input small enough that we could do something with it. Now let's talk for a moment about RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. And for that, I want to run through all 4 tools on this and see where we get. In reality, I'm going to run through 3 of them because, again, OpenAI is throttling me for some reason. So have faith that the process would work with them just as well, but I'll skip it with them. Now, the idea behind Retrieval Augmented Generation is to deal with the size of the context window. Now, there are a couple figures here that come directly from the LangChain4j documentation. I think they did a great job with this, so I'm going to use those. And again, this is a reference directly to the docs. RAG is normally considered to be a 2-step process, although I'm going to do it all at once. In the first step, you take your document or documents and you load them from wherever they're coming from. In my case, they're going to be coming from a URL. Then you split them up into what they call here segments, or are often referred to as chunks, individual bits of data. These segments are then run through what's called an embedding model. The idea is to transform each block of text into a vector, some long list of doubles that represents magnitude and direction in some higher dimensional space. It's basically trying to put a pointer representing the direction and magnitude of this information, if that means anything to you. Those are called embeddings. And the embeddings are stored in what here is indicated as an embedding store, but we often refer to as simply a vector database. And there are lots of open source products out there that can handle vector databases. Things like Chroma or Pinecone or PG Vector. There are lots and lots of them. I'm going to use a simple embedding store in memory that comes from LangChain4j. Now, this is the pre-processing step where you take your information that you want to use for context and you run through this process and save everything in the embedding store. Now what happens is a query comes in, and with that query, you run it through the same embedding algorithm, the same model, and come up with the embedding of the query. So it too is a vector. And then you ask the embedding store, hey, what are the vectors in the data I gave you that are closest to this particular vector? Give me the ones that are, what they say, similar for that. And we'll convert those back to the segments again, add it to the query, and submit that to the large language model. So it's all a way of finding just the most relevant parts of the information, adding that to the query, and submitting it to the model. Let's take a look. Now, in LangChain4j, there are simpler ways to do this. There's a whole mechanism called EasyRag, which takes a bunch of defaults for you. But I figured I'd write it out a little bit. So down here, you can see in this setup, I'm loading the document using a URL document loader. So that's going to go to the link for the Wikipedia article and download it and parse it using a text document parser. Then we do this. We take this document and we split it to 300 character chunks with no overlap on this. That's a number you could tweak. You could decide you want to do something else with it. I'm just picking that number because it's a common default. Then you take that document splitter and split the document using it, giving you a list of text segments. Those are our chunks that I was talking about before. Here is my embedding model. This is the algorithm I'm using to create the embedding. And again, it's just a model that you could add to LangChain4j. It's got a good reputation. I don't know much about it, but it's very common. So I'm going to use that. And when I say embed all, what I'm saying is take all those segments and convert them all to the vectors, and that will give me a list of embeddings. And then I'll use my in-memory embedding store and add them all in. So all of this is setting up the embedding store. Now, the reason I did this in the before all section here is because I'm going to use the same in-memory embedding store for all of my LLMs, all my large language models. And I didn't want to have to recreate that in memory 4 times, so I can reuse it here. That's nice. Now, what I have here is the RAG for all models function, which takes a chat language model as an argument, and I'm using this little method source. There are my chat language models. Once GPT 4.0 no longer has me in timeout or whatever, I'll add it in too, but you'll just see it with Claude and Gemini and Mistral, and I will supply each of those to this method, And what it's going to do is set up this thing called a content retriever using the embedding store, the embedding model. By doing it this way, I could say, look, only give me the 4 most relevant segments, and they've got to score at least 50% in relevance when you do the similarity search. So that gives me some ability to tweak how relevant the documents are to the overall subject. And this is actually going to be important in a moment. So then I go through and adding in the content retriever, I build my AI assistant again and run them all through. And now let's take a look. Okay, there was a slight delay before the first one as the in-memory embedding store was created and populated with all that information. All the embeddings ran through it. Again, in a normal real-life RAG situation, you'd do all that ahead of time. So I'm here, at least I'm only doing it once. And then for the first one, this is the result from Anthropic. And just any order, I'm not worried about the ordering here. So first of all, tell me about the beef. And they say initially had a positive relationship, and then there was a conflict, and here we go on and on. How did it escalate in 2024? And isn't this interesting? I apologize, but I don't have any specific information about how the Drake and Kendrick Lamar feud escalated in 2024 based on the information provided, the fragment 2024. In other words, here's what happened. Even though there's plenty of information in there about that, when it split everything up into individual segments and then encoded them, it lost the context. It didn't understand that, oh, those are all part of the 2024 escalation and should be considered as such. This is the danger of doing something like RAG, where you actually need a lot of the document in order to understand better. Now, I could simply bump up the number of matches and probably get a better answer, but it's something to consider when you're working with RAG yourself, that you make the segments too small, you're going to lose some context information here. So who won? Well, sure, they could still do that. Generally considered that Lamar was winning the feud with Drake, although there's no definitive conclusion. If Kendrick Lamar were to perform at the 2024 Super Bowl halftime show, which we know he is, the decision to include it would likely depend on various factors such as the song's continued relevance, its suitability for a broad audience, and how it fits into the overall performance narrative. You see, so it's giving some factors, but it doesn't really know. Okay, what about Gemini? So Gemini, again, you're not at all surprised. We'll come up with the answers for that. Let me look at the top one. Tell me about the beef. And then here's the question. How did it escalate? I'm sorry, but the information you gave me does not provide an answer to your question. Again, suggesting to me that my segment size is too small, that I'm breaking it. 300 characters is apparently not enough. I'll have to separate it differently. Who won? And they give one source saying Lamar is winning. Why was it controversial? Finally, what are the chances? I cannot provide an answer to the chances of Kendrick Lamar performing not like us during the 2025 Super Bowl halftime show, because the information provided does not have information on Super Bowl performances. Okay, that's wimping out, but all right. Good enough, I guess. And then Mistral, we saw a little bit with Mistral earlier, but once again, we get a lot of background information. Mistral took a pretty good shot at this. Based on the information provided, it seems like there are multiple mentions of the year 2024, but there are no specific details given about how the beef between Drake and Kendrick Lamar escalated that year. Therefore, I can't provide any insights. In other words, once again, it's telling us the chunks are too small, but at least it's picking up that, hey, there's information in there. It's just not returned to me in a format I could do something with. So again, I can skip the who won and why is it controversial. We get it. And then finally, the big question, based on the provided information, is challenging to definitively assess the chances that Kendrick Lamar will perform not like us during the Super Bowl halftime show. However, relevance and impact, artistic statement, right? It says, while there's a possibility that he can perform it, it's not guaranteed. Yeah, okay. The decision would likely be influenced by a combination of the song's impact, artistic intentions, and logistical considerations. What have we learned? Well, this idea of prompt stuffing is not a small thing. You can put a lot of data inside a prompt, especially as the context windows get bigger and bigger. 128K is not small. The only reason we exceeded it was because of all those extra tags in there, all the HTML tags and citations and everything. So a little bit of filtering, like we did with Jsoup, would make a huge difference in whether I can do that at all. Also, while RAG is something that lots of companies want to do and everybody's considering to be a definitive process, if you break the data into small chunks, you do tend to lose some overall context information about what you have. That said, if you're using a good vector database with a good similarity search, because I wasn't playing with a lot of different algorithms here, you may get some pretty good answers out of it. I hope you found that entertaining. Here on the Tales from the Jar Side channel, my name is Ken Kousen, and I try to give you, quote, expert advice on Java and related topics and AI and related topics, and hopefully you found that worthwhile. By Sunday, we'll know what actually happened in the Super Bowl, and I'll add a comment to this. So please subscribe so you can see what happens on the channel and see other Tales from the Jar Side. Thank you.